Okay, gang, we're going to give this a try. My name is Bill Wasor, and I'm the teacher for the Word Seeker Sunday School class at Field Street Baptist Church. And after 3 weeks of not being able to teach, I've decided to take this on and try and see what we can do and distribute this to some other people. We've got another teacher that's been recording some, and I just had to give this a shot myself to see how it would work. Now, this isn't going to be perfect because I'm recording this in my office at a farm outside Joshua, Texas. 20 feet from my window is a chicken yard, and you'll probably hear a rooster crow every now and then. We have dogs all over the yard which bark at the slightest motion of a piece of grass within 200 yards. So you'll get that also. But we're going to start today, and I just wanted to give this to everybody. This is mainly for the Sunday school class, but we can invite anybody we want to this. So I'm hoping that my class will share the link to this to everybody else that they know, and we'll start getting this around. We're not going to let this quarantine get us down. We're going to actually continue on and grow through this whole experience, and we'll be better for it in the long run. I've got the slides right here, and welcome to our virtual classroom. We're going to be studying Luke 24 today for Easter, and there are a lot of things that will be different here today. There are a lot of things that we've experienced that are different. We've been broadcasting our worship services for the last 3 weeks, and if you'd like to go to our YouTube channel for Field Street Baptist Church, you can see Dr. John Hall delivering the message from the last 3 weeks. But we're going to try it from here. Now, there are things that we have to get used to as we do this thing in the virtual world. For one thing, I may decide to put on the mask every once in a while just to make sure that I don't contaminate anybody here. We wouldn't want any of these viruses getting on electrons and going through the wires and getting out there at yours and ending up in your emails and so forth. So we may do this for a while, but it won't last me very long because I can't stand it. It makes my hearing aids fall off. But we're going to go ahead, and people have gotten used to doing things a certain way at church. And we've seen where a lot of people have adapted the home worship to be very much like their worship at church. And I just saw this on the internet the other day, and we find that a lot of people try to do things exactly the way they do them at church. These are back row Baptists, and so if that makes you more comfortable, set up a couple of rows of chairs between you and your monitor, and we'll just have a great time here. We're going to move on into our class here, and as I said, we're in the first chapter, the 24th chapter of Luke, starting at the first verse. And so if you'd like to go to your copy of the scripture, open it up to Luke 24. I'll be using the New International Version today, and I've added a few pictures here to spice this up just a little bit. And so we're going to encounter the Easter story, which is the most important day in our Christian calendar. So as we go to the Christian calendar and we look at what we put a lot of emphasis on, it's going to be Easter, the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And so here we have it at verse 1, and it says, "On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb." Now we're going to dissect this a little bit. You can see the picture here. The women are bringing their spices, and here's Jesus, and all there is grave clothes in the grave. As we see it on the first day of the week, the reason that's specified is because if we go back and we look at the different things that happened prior to this, going back to Good Friday, as you recall, Jesus was taken before Pilate, and he was taken before the Sanhedrin, and he was questioned, and he was ultimately condemned to die, to be crucified. He was crucified on Calvary between two thieves, and it was a very ugly death. It was the most cruel kind of death that you could possibly imagine, because the Romans invented crucifixion, and because it was the most cruel thing they could think of doing to anyone. And it was. Everybody, all of the disciples, all of Jesus' followers were there at the crucifixion. And they saw Jesus die. They saw him give up the ghost. They saw him utter his last words, and then he died. And after that, they took his body down and took it to a tomb. Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea went and requested Jesus' body, and they took it to the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, a tomb that had not been occupied up to this point. But coming up to there, the very first day of the week, Friday was the beginning of the Sabbath. Friday at sunset was the beginning of Sabbath, and on the Sabbath, you weren't really allowed to do much of anything. And everyone went to their own homes, were very quiet, and Jesus was buried on Friday night, and then he spent the day in the tomb on Saturday, and then very early, the first day of the week, which is Sunday, Sabbath does occur in the Jewish calendar on Saturday. We as Christians celebrate it on Sunday, but we have, this is the first day of the week, and we see that Jesus is in the tomb, and they are preparing to prepare his body for the burial. It says very early in the morning. Early in the morning, the women took spices. This had to be very early in the morning. It was the first day of light, because the Sabbath Sabbath goes from Friday night at sunset to Saturday night at sunset. And so they knew they had this job to do, and they weren't going to go do it in the middle of the night. At sunset, it begins to get very dark. They didn't have electric lights. They had small lamps. They had torches, things like that. So nobody was likely to go to a cemetery at sunset. They had a big job to do. They had to anoint Jesus' body. They thought they did. And they took their spices and they moved them to the cemetery. And by the way, I just learned something this week. I was wondering what the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard was. A cemetery is a place designated for the burial of the dead. However, a graveyard is the same thing, but a graveyard is on the property of a church. A graveyard belongs to a church and is on the property of the church. So that's the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard. But it says the women took spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They used a lot of spices. They used a lot of perfumes and oils and ointments, and they covered the body with these ointments and grave cloths. And it was mainly to cut down on the smell of the decomposition of the body. They did not, when they buried people, they buried them in the same day they died usually. They did not embalm them. And they put them in the tomb and covered them up and completely wrapped them up in cloths. You can recall the story of Lazarus, where Jesus called Lazarus out of the tomb. And his sister said, no, don't do that, because he smells bad already, because it's been 4 days. But he came out anyway. But this is the reason for the spices, so they could cover up the smell of the decomposing body. It says they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. If you look at this picture here of the tomb, this is a typical tomb. It was a cave, hand-carved out of rock. This is a limestone wall. This is probably not, this picture is not the one that Jesus was buried in, but it's very typical of burials of that day. And you'll see it has a large round stone here, which can be rolled over the face of the door of the tomb to cover it up and to try and cover up the smell of the decomposition and to make it a sacred place and close it up. The stone rolled in a small groove right here at the base of the door, so that they would have to roll it over here. And the women were concerned that they wouldn't be able to get it open. And so, but when they came, they found that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. But they continued on in and said when they entered, they did not find the body of Jesus. And so this is what it probably looked like to them. As they go in, they go down the steps, and in these graves they would carve a shelf to the edge where they would lay the bodies. Some of the tombs were created to hold as many as 8 people. This one here that you see only has the one, and we see the empty grave cloths laying here on the stone bench that was carved in here. As I said before, this grave is one that was produced for Joseph of Arimathea, we believe, and it had never been used. And so this was a very special place to send Jesus' body, for Joseph and Nicodemus to bring his body to inter it. And they were believing that Jesus was dead and was dead for good. It says that while the women were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. You'll see here, these are angels in this particular picture. This is the one that I picked because, to me, it's the one that looks most like what I would picture. A picture of the angel looking like lightning. And this would have to be a very frightening experience for the ladies. I've never seen anyone that looked like lightning, but I imagine that I'd be pretty much upset if I saw somebody standing there talking to me and looking like lightning. So they were quite afraid. It says, in their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? Now, we look for things in the places that we find convenient to look. And they had assumed that they had gone to the cemetery because the last they saw was that Jesus had died. Jesus was dead. He would be in the cemetery, and so that made sense to them. But they did not want to look in the places where he would be found if he was alive. They did not believe that he was alive. They saw him die. And so here they are at the tomb, at the cemetery, and it says the men said, why do you look for the living among the dead? It almost sounds like a sarcastic question. But we look where we want to look. I heard a story one time about a man who was walking down the street, and he saw someone down on their hands and knees by the sidewalk and by the grass, and he looked down at the man who was on the ground, and he said, what are you doing? He says, I lost my contact lens. Can you help me find it? So the other guy got down, and he started looking around on the ground and looking on the sidewalk and looking in the grass, and they went on about 20 minutes, and the second guy said, well, where did you lose this anyway? And the first guy said, well, I lost it about 15 yards over there. And he said, well, why are you looking here? And he said, well, because the light's better here. Well, that's a kind of a story that we see here. Why are you looking for him here? Well, we figured he was going to be dead. And so they brought all the spices there. But let me see here. I got to close this up here. It says the men then exclaimed to them the whole reason that we worship the way we do. It says, he is not here, he is risen. This is the whole core of Christianity. Jesus died, but he rose again from the dead. All other leaders of different religions have died, but Jesus is the only one who rose again from the dead under his own power. He did not require the assistance of anybody. He conquered death, he conquered Satan, and he conquered sin by doing this, as being our atonement for our sins. Our sins need to be forgiven in order for us to be able to go spend eternity in heaven with him. And the only way we can do that is to rely on Jesus' sacrifice here. He has died, but now it says he is not here. He is risen. And then they continued on. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. And they're trying to convince the ladies, you've heard this before. The angels knew all about this. They knew the whole story. But it says, Jesus told you about this. It says, while he was still with you in Galilee. And he recounts, he quotes Jesus here. It says, and you'll notice these are in red, It says, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day raised again. Okay. That comes from the 18th chapter of Luke. If we go back and look at that, if you have your scripture with you, you want to go back and see that. In Luke 18, 31 through 33, it says, everything that is written, this is a quote from Jesus. Jesus is talking to them. He's talking in the third person, much like he likes to do. He's referring to himself. He uses the term Son of Man, which was his favorite name for himself. It says, everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man will be fulfilled. He will be delivered over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, insult him, and spit on him. They will flog him and kill him. On the third day, he will rise again. This is Jesus telling this to them back in the 18th chapter. And they didn't quite understand this. If you go on to the next verse, it says the disciples did not understand any of this. Its meaning was hidden from them, and they did not know what he was talking about. There are other translations that say that they just couldn't make any sense of it. They couldn't make heads or tails of what he was saying at this point. It didn't make sense to them because it just didn't fit in the scenario that they were trying to work under. But then the ladies, it says they remembered his words. And as soon as they heard the angel quote this, they could go back and they could remember that conversation that they had with all the disciples. Now, the women were disciples. There were men disciples. Everyone who was following him was a disciple. So don't think that it was only the 12 that were confused, because all of these people who were following him were disciples. It says they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11. Now you'll notice there we have the 11 apostles now instead of 12, because Judas has gone and committed suicide. He has taken his own life after he realized what he had done in the betrayal of Jesus. And so now we're down to 11 and all the others, bunches of people. They were hiding. They were hiding in someone's house because they were afraid of the Romans, that the Romans were going to come and take them and kill them as well. So they were all hiding, and then the women come in and they say, Jesus is alive. And so when they came back from the tomb. So as a description of who was there, it said it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Now, it was a kind of a weird thing for them to be saying anyway. However, what you have to realize is that most people did not give the women credit for much sense of any kind. Now, I'm 75 years old, and I know better than to say anything like that. I've survived this long by taking very careful steps here and not getting myself caught in this one. But it says they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. It just didn't fit the scenario that's in their head. They had been celebrating with Jesus. They've been with him as he healed people, as he fed people, as they met together, as they taught people, and they were just having a great time. And Jesus had said, I'm going to die. They didn't make any sense of it, so they discounted it. And now the women go to take care of the burial arrangements for Jesus' body, and they come back and say that Jesus is alive. You see, that can't make any sense at all. And so here they are trying to figure out what's going to happen with this. We continue on. It says, Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering what happened. He is one, and in other translations, in other accounts of this, in other Gospels, he and John ran to the tomb. And Peter ran right in, and he looked over. All he saw was strips of linen, and he was very, very confused. Now, that's one of the problems we have. People do not take Jesus' word for what was happening. Jesus has done something that's completely unprecedented. He has given himself as a sacrifice for sin. We know that we need to be forgiven of our sin. We are all sinners, each and every one of us. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And in order for us to be right with God, to be made right with God, we have to have this saving power of Jesus. Jesus died on the cross. That was the rules that God set up. When somebody sins, somebody dies. Now, the wonderful thing is that we did all the sinning and Jesus did the dying. He gave his life for us. And that's the central point of our entire experience as Christians. We know that we can go and spend eternity in heaven with him because we have accepted his free gift of salvation. And all we have to do is accept that gift, tell others about it, and rejoice in what we have. This Sunday, even though we're not at church, I think it's probably the first Easter Sunday in my life when I have not attended a worship service in a church building, but we're going to do it this Sunday anyway, even if it's kind of a virtual way here. But I want everybody in our class here to know, as well as anybody else who's this has been shared with, that this is the most important thing that you can know when it comes to anything about Christianity. We are all sinners. We have all deserved his wrath. We deserve to die. But Jesus took that burden on himself. He took the burden of the sin and has provided forgiveness for us. The forgiveness that we get is a free gift. There's no way we can pay for it. There's no way we can bring anything to this and provide anything on our own. Jesus took care of it all. We just have to accept the free gift. And so, as those of you who are in my class know, it's very important for us to acknowledge that. And I believe, after teaching this class for 10 years, that all the members that I know in this class have accepted Jesus. But anybody else who might be listening to this who doesn't know what's going to happen when they die might want to take heart with this, because all you have to do to be assured that you're going to spend eternity in heaven with God and with his son Jesus is accept this free gift. Acknowledge that you're a sinner. Say, I am a sinner. I know I've sinned. I know I've come short of everything that you have expected of me. And I ask you right now to take away my sin, Jesus. And when we do that, we come to him humbly, asking for what only he can do for us. We are subsequently baptized, and that is our symbol that we are giving ourselves fully to Jesus and asking him to run our lives from this point on. Peter was very confused, and there's a lot of people still confused today. Even through this quarantine we're going through, people get very apprehensive, get afraid about what's going to happen to them. And if you have friends that don't know what's going to happen to them when they leave this earth, you let us know. I'm going to give my address, my email address at the end of here, and you can come to Field Street Baptist Church. You can come and speak to our pastor, speak to any of our staff members. And it's a little awkward right now getting together and getting into the office, but we have telephones, we have the internet, and we're not going to allow this to hinder our ministry to those who need Jesus more than anything right now. I'm very comfortable because I know that should I be taken by this virus, I'm going to go directly to the arms of God. I'll be in heaven with him. So I have nothing to fear. It's a wonderful feeling to not have that apprehension and unknowing. And if you come to Jesus and ask him to come into your life and take over your life, you will have peace that you've never imagined before. And so thank you for coming to be with us today. Thank you for joining us here in this virtual classroom. We're going to be doing this every Sunday for quite a while, and I'm hoping I can put this together a little bit more regularly for other topics and other subjects as well. And if you'd like to get any more of these, I'm going to have my email address here in a few minutes, and you can email me. But come see us at Field Street Baptist Church. Soon we're going to be gathering again in our worship service in our building, and we're at the corner of Field Street and Henderson in Cleburne, Texas. We have a wonderful pastor, Dr. John Hall. And if you'd like to see any of his other sermons, you just go to our YouTube channel, and you can see many, many services that have been archived there, and watch especially the last 3 Sundays that he's presented for us online, just for us online. Our website is fieldstreet.com, and you can go there and you can see the services from there. You can see the next service that's coming up. If you don't know where to watch it, just go to your internet and go to fieldstreet.com. My name is Bill Wasore, and I'm the teacher of this Word Seekers class, and we hope that you'll come join us. Every Sunday, after this quarantine is lifted at 9:45, we'd love to see you here, and if you don't seem to be in our age range, you might want to come and try another class. We have many, many classes here. So come see us at church, come see us online, and we'll look forward to talking to you again really soon.